Annyeonghaseyo, Pangapsamnida. My name is Natalie. My Korean name is Hanbit. I was gifted a Korean name by a wonderful Korean person, Julion, whose Anglo name is Christina. She gave me this name to welcome me into her family, really, after decades of practice of the Korean art of Taekwondo. Taekwondo effectively means the art of the hand and the foot, or more literally, it is foot, fist, way. I have practiced the martial art for a couple of decades now, and I had this idea to play with the moves, and if somebody was in a nightclub or something like that, they could pick some of the moves from Taekwondo and you would just think it was a dance. And then I kept toying with this idea, and then a couple of decades later discovered that in other mixed martial arts they have creative patterns, but the creative patterns were really the pre-described and pre-choreographed patterns just sent to music, which, well, that's interesting, but I thought, what else can we do? How can I push this art a little further? How can I have a bit more fun and break the rules and maybe blend some other movements with dance or a different aesthetic, or even focus on identity and reshape the entire art completely? So I ended up doing just that as a bit of an experimentation and playing with the art itself, and infused it with a few dance moves, and got rid of the dobok and replaced it with drag king costume and set that to music as well. There were most definitely Taekwondo moves there, but there was also a plethora of other moves, and it inspired me to start to unpack the art and unpack the narrative around the art, and really led me to this core idea of, juxtaposing the Taekwondo, the historical aspect of Taekwondo, maybe in bringing it into the contemporary world, reimagining it as an actual artistic form beyond its functional use or the militaristic aspects, and see what its artistic potential is. So how can Taekwondo be reimagined as an aesthetic practice and serve as the foundation for movement that encourages expression? I'm integrating autoethnography and phenomenological speaking to explore this research. I think this allows for a multidimensional exploration of Taekwondo's potential as an evolving artistic form, and I think these methodologies will really allow me to challenge the rigid male-dominated militaristic origins and potentially reimagine it as a fluid, expressive and inclusive practice. Murray talks about autoethnography and mentions that it allows critical examination of embodied engagement. And with Taekwondo, I can foreground subjective experience as a site of inquiry and interweave personal narrative with broader socio-cultural and theoretical discourses, and look at intersections of tradition, identity and artistic reinvention, particularly through iterative reflection of doing, reflecting, refining, redoing with personal insight. My early Taekwondo practice adhered to rigid movement patterns, both physical and cultural, really. And then over time, I began to interrogate the structures and recognised the latent fluidity and this tension between form and transformation led me to explore Taekwondo as an artistic language rather than a purely martial discipline. And autoethnography means I get to look at things like how Taekwondo is inscribed onto my body through muscle memory and rhythm and breath, and what about positionality and the implications of theatricality, and do these deviations really challenge or extend Taekwondo? In terms of phenomenological writing, or in this case speaking, Van Manen's article really talks about capturing the lived experience as it's perceived in real time to evoke that sensory, emotional and embodied aspect of the experience and immerse the viewer in the immediacy of the moment and really focus on how things felt. So I get to explore embodied perception. How does it feel to move or strike or balance with sensory awareness in terms of breath and gravity and resistance within the body, and temporal and spatial orientation and movement with perception of time and space, with relational dynamics and how movement engages with air and ground or imagined resistance. I think that these two methodologies really will allow me to potentially develop these new movement patterns and challenge Taekwondo's established lexicon, and it'll enable me to articulate the experience of navigating unfamiliar terrain visually and verbally, and engage the audience through movement beyond any theoretical distractions. To understand this research properly, we have to understand the historical origins of the art. So it emerged in Korea through martial history. It evolved from ancient combat techniques and into a disciplined art and a modern sport, but it is rooted in military traditions. It emphasises discipline, rigid rules, codified systems of patterns. Each of those have a distinct narrative. There are 24 patterns, 10 are colour, 4 are black. You progress from 10th Gup, which is colour, up to 9th Dan, which is black. Each pattern is historically linked to a significant male figure or warrior, reinforcing gendered frameworks that continue to shape the practice today. The absence of female warriors of Taekwondo's recorded history contribute to the invisibility of women within the discipline, and the structured rules and traditional forms still dictate movement, not just physically, but also still play a hand in shaping the identity of its practitioners. Korea has a long history of unarmed combat, and we understand that the Korean martial art of Taekwon, the ancient Korean martial art of Taekwon, really did influence Taekwondo. And then in the Japanese occupation, the Korean martial arts were really suppressed and you had to focus on Japanese forms. But post-World War II, kwans or schools started to emerge, and it became known as Korean karate. But then there were some indigenous Korean techniques starting to come back. And then in 1955, General Choi Hong-hee played a pivotal role in Taekwondo's development for the military, and it was officially named and systemized. There was a lot of political history at the time, and Taekwondo effectively got broken into two: the WTF, World Taekwondo Federation, and the ITF, International Taekwondo Federation. My art is International Taekwondo Federation, the ones founded by General Choi. It focuses on self-defense, traditional techniques, but there is also competition, whereas World Taekwondo is the style that you see in the Olympics, and it has become mainly sport-focused. there are still similarities, and there is also reciprocity. They recognise my rank and we theirs. So Taekwondo is made up of some main components. One of them, fundamentals. So the fundamental techniques involve kicks or cha-gi, punches, jita-gi or blocks, ma-gi. And then we move to patterns, otherwise known as tulls. There is sparring, we have breaking and self-defense technique. This is all underpinned by philosophies and tenets. For the purposes of this research, I am primarily focusing on the patterns or tulls. They are a pre-arranged sequence of movements that you learn. They are distributed equally on both sides of the body and can be performed by anyone. And it is a way of practicing self-defense or sparring on one's own. The art of Taekwondo is practiced by millions worldwide for self-defense, for fun, for fitness, for competition, for personal development. And the art continues to evolve with the new interpretations, with the creative patterns. And so when General Choi invented the art, or I guess he evolved it from a whole bunch of other arts to create his own. He created a wide variety of techniques that he wanted to be used in almost any situation. He followed 12 principles from movement should be designed to produce maximum power in accordance with scientific formulas and the principle of kinetic energy. That is why ITF use sine wave, whereas the World Taekwondo Federation do not. Other things like correct breathing methods should be devised, enhancing the speed of the movement. Each attacking tool should be clearly defined and soundly based on the structure of the human body. There's many principles here, and he highlights that he wanted everybody, young and old, men and women, to be able to utilise the art. He specifically says adherence to these 12 basic principles is what makes Taekwondo a martial art, an aesthetic art, a science and a sport. So I'm grabbing hold of the part that says the aesthetic art, because over the years we really see it as a functional, militaristic, combat-focused art as opposed to an aesthetic one. There are many rules from the theory of power to the tenets that we say at the beginning of class, and the training secrets of Taekwondo that he states you should keep in mind when you're training. There are 9 of them. A couple of them are to study the theory of power thoroughly, to bring the movement of the eyes, hands, feet and breath into a single coordinated action. All movements must begin with a backward motion with very few exceptions. However, once the movement is in motion, it should not be stopped before reaching its target. To create a sine wave during the movement by utilising knee spring, to exhale briefly at the moment of each blow except a connecting motion. So all of these training secrets of Taekwondo, well, they're not secrets, are they? You've published them in the Encyclopedia of Taekwondo, but they are all understood by students and unpacked and understood, so we know why we're doing sine wave gravity. It increases the impact. We know why we're breathing at that particular moment. I also want to note that I'm not doing the historical, socio-cultural, socio-political nature of Taekwondo any justice. A lot of it is out of scope for this small research project. I think there's little argument that Taekwondo is gendered. Throughout the entire book, there is a lot of speak about the military and Confucianism and men, and even goes so far as to say, as for womanfolk, they will undoubtedly find Taekwondo an invaluable asset in tackling and driving away wolves, so to speak. And on it goes and references frail women and talks about self-defense. There are physical and mental positive effects that you get from participating in Taekwondo. A sense of inner peace and harmony and flexibility, grace, balance. You have to use your imagination. There is purposeful action. The training permeates the conscious and the subconscious action of the student if you apply the philosophical elements to it as well that extend beyond the dojang. The dojang is our training hall, and you think of it as a way of life and a way of living that instills a moral code within. So through my Taekwondo practice, my personal experience, I know that it is a beautiful art. I also know that it is lethal. And I know that General Choi says it's not gendered, and references wearing the dobok, which is our uniform, white pants and a white top, because we're all wearing the same. But the fact of the matter, it does have a gendered narrative to it. I also know that through its patterns, its tells, the art is really amplified, and there are creative, almost dance-like physical theatre qualities that sit in these moves, although they are still attached to the discipline and rigidity of the art, hence why I want to explore them a little further. There are some creative patterns, but as I mentioned in my introduction, they're really just overlaid with music. I experienced incredible empowerment when I received my black belt. Actually, probably when I started and went up through the belts from yellow through to green and blue and red and black, and definitely beyond first dan. There's no argument there. Cholet has done a PhD on empowerment, and its research highlights that Taekwondo is empowering and can empower women, and also it can be free of gender constraints. She really does focus on empowerment within the actual tradition of Taekwondo, but this research shifts this towards the aesthetic side with more performativity, and talks about reimagining Taekwondo as an evolving artistic language. And by centering on aesthetic expression and even identity exploration, this work attempts to disrupt the patriarchal narratives and attempts to redefine martial movement as a site of creative potential, various directions and at various levels, and a way to utilize fundamental movements in a series and gain an understanding of muscle, breath control, fluid movements, smooth, rhythmic movements, and crisp, sharp techniques. And really, when you watch people do patterns, you can understand if they have an understanding of the theory of power, or if they understand the secrets of Taekwondo at all, because it will be very evident in their patterns. Choi said that he chose 24 patterns to represent 24 hours, one day, or all of your life. So there are some rules for patterns as well, and the following points should be considered while performing patterns. There are 9 of them. They should begin and end in exactly the same spot, indicating accuracy. You should use correct posture and facing at all times, and the muscles of the body should be tensed and relaxed at the proper critical moments in the exercise. It should be performed in a rhythmic movement with the absence of stiffness, utilizing sine wave, accelerated and decelerated at the appropriate time. You should perfect it before moving on, therefore before you grade to the next one. You've got to know the purpose of each movement. They need to be performed with realism and should be equally distributed. They all have a different shape and they all have a different narrative. For example, your first black belt pattern, Kwon-Do, is named after the famous Kwon-Do Toi Huang, the 19th king of the Goguryeo dynasty, who gained all of the lost territories, including the greater part of Manchuria. The diagram, which is like an upside down capital T with a cross in the middle, it represents the expansion and the recovery of lost territories. The 39 movements refer to the first 2 figures of 391 AD, the year he came to the throne. So the diagram is how the pattern moves across the floor. Now, the beginning and ending in the same spot has incredible significance because each technique or your actual stance has to be adjusted accordingly. And so if people don't understand their own body mechanics, they won't end up in the correct spot, and they are called fundamentals for a reason. So the patterns are really a great test of your holistic knowledge of Taekwondo, from stance to all of the movements within, the attacks, the kicks and the blocks. Another black belt pattern, Po-Un, the narrative attached. Po-Un is the pseudonym of a loyal subject, Chung Mong-Chu, who is a famous poet and whose poem, "I would not serve a second master though I might be crucified 100 times," is known to every Korean. He was also a pioneer in the field of physics. The diagram, which is just a horizontal line, represents his unerring loyalty to the king and country towards the end of the Goguryeo dynasty. The final first Dan pattern, Gaebak, is a vertical line, is named after Gaebak, a great general in the Baekje dynasty of 660 AD. The diagram represents his severe and strict military discipline. So learning these first degree patterns, it's a great privilege to become a black belt and then to learn these spectacular patterns, and all of these young women whom I trained are asked to infuse the masculinity of a warrior or that masculinity of that poet, and with severe, strict military discipline, as is noted in the last one. And this is when I started originally to ask questions. I was like, where are the women? The absence of female warriors in Taekwondo's history really has contributed to the invisibility of women within the practice. And it does reinforce a male-dominated framework. The structured rules and the traditional patterns do dictate the movement. And it not only defines the physical execution, but because of the person who invented it, it has a different positionality. So I am hoping to come and offer some new moves from a different positionality and reimagine it as an artistic language not from solely a male military combative member. So as I previously stated, the Taekwondo is a martial art. It's of a militaristic nature, trying to flip it into an artistic embodied practice. My personal experience, I see dance like creative, aesthetic qualities. They do have competitions with the actual pattern, and they still remain rigid, and even with that small amount of creativity, they aren't very innovative. There is a space for them, definitely, but I want to see what I can do beyond that. I have incorporated drag before. I'm going to look at this through some performativity and feminist theory and perspectives, and see if I can challenge the traditional narratives as well and break from the traditional forms. I know it carries consequences, but it also opens up artistic possibilities. So I'm going to attempt to integrate theoretical perspectives, explore Taekwondo beyond the traditional functional and combative, and look at it through performativity and as artistic expression. So because I imagine these patterns have aesthetic appeal for performance, that brings me to Judith Butler's theory of performativity that argues that gender and identity are constructed through repeated actions. Well, you practice your Taekwondo over and over. And traditional martial arts training enforces these bodily norms, reinforces rigid masculine coded movements. However, if I reimagine Taekwondo patterns, it allows for some gender subversion and expanded representation. Drag or not, I think that's in the future. However we do it, however we look at interpreting these patterns, these norms can be disrupted. So by looking at the patterns and distinguishing between the functional and the expressive, then Taekwondo can be reframed more as more of a theatrical act than purely just a martial sequence. So I'm thinking about things like, how does it construct gender or identity or meaning? Does it socialize our bodies? Do the elements of the dobok costume and dojang space reinforce or challenge the norms? And can me breaking the pattern rules function as feminist resistance? So speaking of feminist resistance, Simone de Beauvoir's feminist phenomenology examines how gendered bodies shape perception, movement, and the lived experience. So in the context of Taekwondo, it reveals how women, non-binary practitioners navigate spaces historically structured by patriarchal norms, and how the practice develops bodily knowledge over time, and therefore how that shapes social limits or maybe pushes them. De Beauvoir's work critiques the idea of that feminine essence. So if we look at that, we can apply Taekwondo's gendered history and how we experience and resist these bodily limitations. But as well as that, just the very nature of a pattern being aesthetic forces me to look at other practitioners in the world who have had similar ideas. And we have Philip Zerilli's psychophysical training. Zerilli explores mind-body integration in performance, emphasising breath, control, focus and presence, much like Taekwondo. It's rooted in Asian martial arts with meditative traditions. It highlights mental and physical disciplines and how those movements merge. He studied the Kalaripayattu, excuse my pronunciation, as an embodied performance, and that provided a framework for understanding how martial arts encoded cultural identity and personal expression. And now this can show how Taekwondo can also be imagined, or reimagined rather, as an expressive art form. So Eugene Barber's theatre anthropology, the concept of pre-expressivity aligns with the preparation before a Taekwondo pattern begins. It focuses on presence and energy before defined expression, and the principles of dynamic balance, opposition of energy, transformation, habitual movement. Also studied Kalaripayattu, and which emphasizes inner energy and awareness, all called prana or chi. And in Taekwondo, it's like a shimshigi, so you recenter yourself. And that's about transformation of energy states, which really is key to reimagining Taekwondo as an aesthetic language. So this psychophysical training in the mind-body integration of both Zerilli and Barber emphasize the mind-body unity. Zerilli explores how martial arts cultivate and act as awareness and infuse it with precision and embodied presence, essential for performance. And Barber highlights that it definitely aligns with the idea of preparing the body before the expression emerges. The Barber applied Zerilli's principles directly to actor training, particularly with energy flow and oppositional forces and spatial awareness, and things like breath and energy and embodied presence. The Suzuki method and Meyerhold's biomechanics also hold significance. The Suzuki method emphasizes breath control, grounding, physical endurance, and totally aligns with Taekwondo's disciplined movement. And Meyerhold's biomechanics deconstruction reconstructs movement for expressive effect. Now, potentially it could provide a tool for reshaping Taekwondo into new creative expression, but both approaches do enhance Taekwondo's potential for heightened performativity. So really, all of these practitioners offer a bridge between martial arts and performance and reinforce the idea that Taekwondo can indeed be transformed into an artistic language rather than just purely a combat practice. They suggest that their forms of movement or martial arts can be utilised in the breakdown of Taekwondo patterns, and they can be trained and assessed not just for technical execution nor for militaristic combative discipline, but for expressive depth using energy transformation, psychophysical presence, and all of it. This aligns with my goal of attempting to reposition Taekwondo within an aesthetic practice. So in order to break down the functional combative patterns and look at their aesthetic component or create a pattern with a deeper aesthetic attached to it, then I think about the Taekwondo patterns and when do you get to understand them as an art, and really that is in the form of a competition, and then they are judged on a set of technical performance criteria, which is precision and power and rhythm and adherence to the traditional execution of each form and is governed by rules, and it is assessed accordingly. It is about the synchronization of the movement, finishing together with precise coordination and maximum power, and beginning and ending in the same spot for ensuring spatial awareness and balance, and any deviations like stance length and stepping or balance can lead to deductions or disqualification even. You're assessed on power and breath control and sine wave and fluidity, which you have to coordinate that with the natural rise and fall and maximum force, and exhaling at the moment of impact, and maintain the correct facing with your eyes as well as your body to the intended target, although it is an invisible target. It is all about precision in your stances and your technique, from foot positioning, width, length, and weight distribution. The balance of the body and the foot positioning is imperative in the foundation of the art to get your stances correct, and everything is built from there. They are all essential. So for me to adapt this and look at more freedom of movement and flow for interpretation, I still need to emphasize control and precision. So in order to do that, I looked at the ITF patterns, competition criteria for judgment, and it is judged according to technical accuracy of your fundamentals, which goes from movement as prescribed in the syllabus, the stance in terms of length and weight and distribution, hand and foot positioning, chambering and execution, the impact of technique, the explosiveness of it, and the speed. Actually, even the key up, which is our yell for the projection of power and confidence. Also, balance and control, stability, especially during kicks, indomitable spirit, which is one of the tenets, is also mentioned for martial spirit to demonstrate confidence, intent, commitment, presence. It comes down to precision, posture, projection. I won't go into deductions and penalties at all. So when I started to think about unpacking the movements of Taekwondo, the embodied movements for performance and theatricality, and looking at those theoretical frameworks in conjunction with Taekwondo's judging criteria and the realization of what needs to be in the pattern, I thought, well, how can I assess if this new formula, or if this new aesthetic discovery has any worth? So then I thought, well, perhaps I could apply a form of assessment to it to analyse the movement itself. And the first one that came to mind was Laban's movement analysis. It is a system of music notation for movement, really. It's well known, it's widely used. It provides a structured framework for assessing movement or creating movement through space and weight and flow and time, and used for character creation. It is not used in Taekwondo, but I'm thinking, how could it be integrated for the analysis of these new patterns? So the Laban framework helped me to reimagine Taekwondo patterns beyond combat, emphasising artistic expression and the emotional resonance, and it's essential to developing a new matrix for assessing these new aesthetic performances. And I use this as the
the base really to create a new matrix for new patterns and then to explore it from there. So I'm really just shifting the focus from this strict technical accuracy towards more of an expressive, artistic, conceptual movement that still values the control and the martial discipline. So with the Laban categories, it's space, direct, indirect, weight, strong, light, flow, bound, free, time, sustained, and sudden. And I've started to align them with the traditional Taekwondo focus of precise and linear, power impact, controlled transitions, and proper rhythm. And then that talks about expansion and contraction and, space, fluidity, sharpness, and weight shifts for expression beyond combat and, not as restrictive, maybe some emotional engagement beyond the pre-written narratives that are attached to those patterns, and also about, maybe manipulating the tempo for dramatic effect and also for narrative pacing. So if the original traditional Taekwondo pattern with its combative moves are done in accordance to the narrative or infused by the meaning of this masculine narrative, then I couldn't possibly create new moves with a new aesthetic if I didn't have a new narrative. So I will also create a micro narrative for these patterns as well. But the proposed competition rubric for these new Taekwondo patterns to see if they are worthy really do combine the traditional assessment of Taekwondo with Laban notation. I'm looking at movement identity, dynamism and flow, conceptual depth, rhythmic complexity, and embodied presence. So now it gets a little bit complex, I guess, because it's expanded criteria. It is the fusion of Laban and Taekwondo patterns with new artistic criteria as well. So it goes through the Laban side of your space, weight, time and flow, and then it looks at the application of the pattern in terms of movement, direction, forceful, fluid, any acceleration, deceleration, breath control, balance, etc. And then I'm adding the new artistic criteria to that as well with the movement identity and rhythmic complexity, etc. So when we look at the forms and the focus of the tells, it's going to be, is there original, does the performer, the practitioner of Taekwondo bring original movement vocabulary? Is there a personal signature? Is it, what about transitions? Are there any? Do they fully inhabit the movement? What does it communicate? And how has it pushed it beyond combative? And then I just looked at the category with the ITF traditional pattern criteria, for example, technical accuracy, and the criteria being proper execution of techniques, stances, and strikes. Then I linked it to the Laban movement analysis, in this case, how precisely the movement aligns with spatial and dynamic intent, with the new artistic criteria of movement identity, in this case, is there a unique signature in the movement vocabulary? Then I looked at the ATF category of power and strength, demonstrating force and impact with controlled energy. And then the Laban, weight of strong versus light and how is force distributed in strikes and transitions. And then the new artistic criteria of dynamism and flow. Does the movement shift seamlessly between any qualities? And then balance and stability, maintaining control, proper weight distribution, and smooth transitions, which is flow, bound and free. Are movements intentionally controlled or expansive, which is embodied presence? Is the movement fully inhabited and intentional? And then ITF Taekwondo, breath control, the proper use of breath to enhance control and power, into the integration of breath with movement transitions. And the new artistic criteria of rhythmic complexity are the pauses or bursts of energy and the tempo shifts used effectively. We're moving through to rhythm and timing, which is consistent tempo and fluidity, which is quick versus sustained, and how do we manipulate it. The new criteria of conceptual depth. Does the pattern convey a clear narrative or an emotion? Expression of intent, which is the clarity of the attack, defense intentions, and the movements. So how are the attacks or defensive movements performed, which is our creative intent? Does the movement transcend technique, communicate deeper meaning, focus and concentration, mental presence and engagement throughout? Is attention sustained? Is there control in every movement, which is performance depth? Does the performer fully engage with the audience or engage the audience? Pattern flow and continuity, transitions between the movements, integration of all of these categories for artistic coherence. Does the sequence feel cohesive and structured? So then we've got correct direction and facing, which needs to be executed towards the intended target, which translates to Laban. Does movement align with the spatial intent and orientation? And our new artistic criteria is the use of the dojang or the stage, intentional and expressive. And there's overall performance quality, which is the indomitable spirit, the confidence, the martial art and the engagement, and the combination of all of Laban's movement qualities, and inventiveness and originality for the new artistic criteria. Does the pattern push boundaries and redefine movement? Now, why I think this, or does this work as a comprehensive assessment? Because it really does balance the traditional with the artistic. It integrates ITF judging standards. It integrates the rules of a pattern, plus it adds to that the Laban movement of analysis for creative expression. It allows for innovation, but you still retain the structure. It looks at technical execution, creativity. It creates a fair and versatile judging model. Now, you don't have to use this for competition. That could be used for personal creation, for whatever way you want to use this aesthetic art for. So, reimagining Taekwondo as an artistic and performative expression, we really do shift the focus from that militaristic rigidity to artistic expression. And the hope is that this project reclaims martial arts as a space for all identities and artistic identities as well, through performative storytelling, altered movements, aesthetic reimagination. It can break those historical limitations and become an evolving artistic and performative practice. First of all, what role do the narratives play in the martial arts training, and how does naming them shape the performance? We talked about it before, and you're supposed to embody that masculinity to put in. So before I can play with the patterns, I have to have a narrative, and then I have to figure out what pattern, and then I have to look at what moves I want to look at. So this is what I'm going to try. I'm going to choose a pattern it's going to be a black belt pattern. I'm going to examine some of the individual techniques within it and make intentional deviations. I'm going to create a narrative that challenges the male-centered Taekwondo narrative, and I'm going to reinterpret them and create something with could be dance, non-traditional movements, or any element of personal and identity exploration. So to disrupt these gendered narratives and challenge traditional norms, I am going to, what I need to do is focus on black belt patterns and maybe just 4 to 6 moves within them that I will then identify and alter, and I will investigate those sequences, and I will have a narrative or an abstract concept or something attached to it to infuse the movement itself. I will look at that intersection of storytelling with martial arts and the aesthetic. I will deconstruct them. I will consider things from Suzuki Method and Barber and Zerilli in terms of grounding yourself and breath control and precision from Taekwondo itself and the key movements, and I will do iterative application, and I will deviate from tradition and employ rule breaking as a form of feminist resistance, and I will evolve the art in some way. There will be an impact because of my positionality and life experience, because I will be rewriting the pattern from a diverse perspective beyond the male-dominated narrative and discipline. So I think this reimagining and drawing on feminist phenomenology and performativity, it automatically subverts traditional movements and gendered narratives in Taekwondo, and could potentially show how the practice can become a platform for identity exploration or performance and just be a reimagined expression. When I'm looking at it, what moves will I keep? What will I alter? What will I eliminate? What about the sequence? Will I build it from the narrative, or will the narrative come from the movement? What will the relationship be? So this research is really positioned at the intersection of martial arts and performance and identity, and the artistic reconfiguration of them intentionally rework Taekwondo and disrupt traditional structures. And we expand the functional parameters of the martial arts as a medium for storytelling and emotional expression and embodied discourse. We integrate actor training methodologies, drawing on Suzuki and Zerilli, to understand and enhance the potential of martial movement. We disrupt and destabilise gendered norms in martial arts, challenging the assumption that they're inherently aggressive and masculine and linear. And we incorporate some fluidity and hybridity and performativity. And we even reframed the competitive structure with an assessment rubric to understand the narrative coherence and the thematic integration and the aesthetic innovation. And it works because it challenges patriarchal and militaristic foundations, creates inclusive spaces for people to engage with taekwondos in way that aligns with their lived experiences. It expands martial arts beyond self-defense. There's philosophical inquiry, artistic experimentation, and rule breaking. So ultimately, Taekwondo can be considered an evolving, expressive art form rather than just a static, combative discipline. It can be considered a philosophical aesthetic and a performative practice. Future directions for reimagining Taekwondo and its ongoing potential. I was asked in the class, how can it evolve for the 21st century? Well, there's a vast array of options. It can create lots of potential as an artistic practice and can continue to expand beyond application. It's a promising avenue for the development of a new martial art, or a one that looks at expressing and exploring diverse identity and even cultural influences. It could almost be a blend of Taekwondo or dance theatre, embodied storytelling. It could become a new training aesthetic for actors. It could be used for gender exploration through identity and drag. It really does shift the narrative of martial arts beyond self-defense to self-expression. And if Taekwondo is stripped of combat, does it lose its meaning, or do we just create a new aesthetic language for reimagined movement? Film offers a dynamic sensory way to present my research on Taekwondo as an artistic practice. Through movement and visual storytelling and performativity, it engages audiences and makes complex ideas really accessible, I think, beyond academic writing and beyond the specialisation of people in the know with Taekwondo. The film provides a bit of an immersive experience, I think, to demonstrate embodied knowledge in real time and showcases the transformation of my practice and the research. And it really does turn Taekwondo into an aesthetic language, and it goes beyond its military discipline.